We'll start in just about a minute or so. A couple of logistics. Number one is that a recording is happening, as you just heard. Number two, for those of you who are joining as as viewers, if you could kindly take yourself off camera, so that we can highlight the speakers more easily. And then what we would like you to do is go to the view in the top right corner of your Zoom, where you can change from speaker to gallery, etc. And there's an option there for show non-video participants. So we want you to select that option. Okay, take yourself off camera, go to the upper right hand corner of your Zoom where there's a view option, click that and select show non-video participants. Okay, well, welcome to this session on equity in contracting, strengthening partnerships, between funders and small local evaluation firms. My name is Julia Kaufman. I'm the executive director of the Center for Evaluation Innovation, and we are a proud co-sponsor of this session, or a co-host, I should say, along with BLE Solutions and the Institutes for Peace and Development. I'm just going to give you a quick introduction on what we're talking about today, and then hand it over to our speakers. But just by way of a little background, a few years ago, Carlisle and Hippolyte, who wrote the piece that really inspired this session, came to me to have a conversation about some of the challenges that they were experiencing as solo and small evaluation firms. And at the time we are continuing to have quite a few conversations in our field and in our broader sectors about how sometimes biases and inequities can get baked into some of the routines and practices of the work that we do. So that includes evaluation commissioning and evaluation contracting. So these biases can show up in ways that disadvantage smaller firms over larger firms, or may disadvantage firms that are in the global south compared to firms that are in the global north. At the same time, we know there are many, many advantages to engaging small firms and solo practitioners, particularly because they're often rooted in place with knowledge and lived experience that's critically important to our evaluation efforts. So Hippolyte and Carlisle decided to write up the things that they had been talking to one another about and thinking about. And importantly, not just to point out some of the challenges and the problems that they were seeing and experiencing, but also to identify some solutions and some action steps. So that's the report that many of you have read, or the executive summary that goes along with it. But I just want to mention something else about this process. So I think one of the additional challenge for small firms and solo practitioners that both Carlisle and Hippolyte experienced is that there's also often not resources to stop and write up the things like the report that they wrote, and to do the kind of thought leadership and field building that we're talking about today. My organization supported the publishing of the document and a little bit of their time, but largely they had to do that when they found the time, and it took some time. And so I just wanted to mention that we're not talking about that today, but that is another sort of disadvantage that can show up for small firms and solo practitioners that then influence your visibility in the field and in the sector, and relate that relates to the themes we're talking about today. So I'm excited about this conversation, because we're going to hear a summary of the content that showed up there, but in the report, but also this is really a set of conversations and dialogues between evaluation commissioners or funders and evaluators from small firms. So we are going to ground the content in real life practice and feature those dialogues. So the run of show here is, I'm done talking now. I'm going to hand it over to Hippolyte to give us an overview of some of the content and to make some introductions. And then we will engage in those dialogues. Our intent is to leave enough time for some question and answer. If you have comments or questions, please do use the chat. But it is our intent to leave some time for some of that interaction. And then at the end, we will wrap it up with some next steps that are coming out of this, and I'll make a couple of closing remarks. So with that, again, if you have joined us in the last few minutes and are not off camera, please do go off camera. And with that, I'll hand it over to you, Hippolyte.
Thank you, Julia, for framing up the discussions this afternoon on my side for us. And thank you again also for shepherding this process up to this point, and as well as thanks to the institute that you had. I'd like also to thank some of our colleagues who have helped us in many ways, reviewing the draft reports, providing suggestions, in particular, Amy, who is with us today, Amy Abrickson, thank you, and Tonyin Akpan from Nigeria, thank you for joining us and being able to support this process to this point. By way of introduction, my name is Hippolyte Paul. I live and work out of Ghana. I did some work way back for Catholic Relief Services. Now I lead and head the Institute for Peace and Development, which I founded. My colleague Carlisle lives out in the US, where she is the founder and chief executive of BLE Solutions, also a small firm, evaluators. Both Carlisle and I had the chance to work together in Catholic Relief Services way back in the 1990s. We parted ways and then found our ways ourselves back together somehow, doing similar work. And as we collaborated and worked together, to try to support the work that we're all doing in a separate way, we realized that there were a lot of things in common, and we kept on discussing how do we get involved with the bigger commissioners of evaluations, how do we get into that way and provide the service that we can. So as we spoke about it, we thought about it and said, probably we're not the only ones facing these challenges. So why don't we put our ideas together? And that's how we went to Julia, and she graciously supported that process. And so we put our ideas together to put together the brief and then the full paper that you may have read already, which highlighted some of the challenges that Julia has already raised, about issues related to contracting processes, even the initial phases of getting an approval, proposal written and approved, all the challenges that we face there, But having said that, we recognize that we also came from a background where we were also in positions to commission evaluations or participate in the commission evaluations. And then we're at the other end where we're receiving the decisions that come out of that process. So we put this together by way of helping us to broaden a conversation that allow us, that is the people who commission evaluations, as well as those who undertake evaluations, to have a broader dialogue on how do we make the contracting process more equitable, and supportive of small and solo evaluation firms that are operating. So for this discussion, we have the open letter that you must have read with the brief. But we decided that probably to bring this to a wider audience based on the very warm reception that we had of that publication, we would organize a series of webinars where we will bring out issues and discuss them with people like you on the page today, so that together we can broaden the discussion and try to find solutions that will be of mutual benefit to everyone. So we are happy today to have two sets of people. who will help us in this discussion process. The first set represents the field of those institutions that commission or fund evaluations. They will bring their perspectives to us to see what are some of the benefits and also challenges they face contracting with small solo evaluation firms like us. On our side, we also have a group of 3 people who also share their experience, their joys and pains of engaging with the contracting processes or managing evaluations. So I'd like to thank at this point the panelists that have agreed to be part of this process. Amy Abritson from the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, thank you for coming. Jeff Krentel from the Conrad Hilton Foundation, thank you for coming. And also Maurice Samuels from the Sierra Health Association, out in Sacramento. Thank you for coming. On the evaluators side, we have Tonyin Akpan from Oracle Services in Nigeria. Thank you, Tonyin, for staying up to join us. And then also Tiffany Wilson, who is an independent evaluator and working in the Sacramento area. And then you'll have, again, my own self joining in as one of the discussants in this. So that's the 3 groups of people that we have here. For the time that we have at our disposal, what we would do is to start a conversation that allows us to look at what are the strengths of how we can work together. What is that we can do to strengthen the partnerships between small solo evaluation firms and then the commissioners of evaluations? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? What can we do? So we will have a session where the panelists will be responding to specific questions. But as Julia said, we want to have enough time at the end for you in the team to also share your views by way of questions or contributions and so forth, so that we can enrich this discussion and move forward. So this is, in a nutshell, how we anticipate this to run. And I'll hand over to Caroline now to take us through the process. Caroline?
Thanks so much, Hippolyte. That was fabulous. So we are very grateful to all of our panelists for being with us today. We very much value your partnership. I am going to ask each one of you one question. I'm going to ask you to be very brief in your response. After you each answer one question, hopefully we'll have about 10 minutes where you guys can talk among yourselves. So be listening to what each other says to see what you want to build on. Everybody else, we will then open the floor for conversation with you. If you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, or when we get to the open Q&A session, you can raise your hands and we'll call on you. So with that, Amy, I'm going to start with you. And what I'd love to hear from the Hewlett Foundation perspective is why were you all interested in working with small local evaluation firms?
Thanks, Carlisle. Well, of course, there were many, many reasons, but I'll describe 3 that were at the heart of what our Gender Equity and Governance, or GEG, program team, who are working on a strategy to support inclusive governance, we're looking for in a learning and evaluation partner. And the first was really local presence. So the Hewlett Foundation, we operate with the lean staffing model. We have only one office in Menlo Park, California, but a large part of the inclusive governance strategy work is led by grantee partners in Mexico, Ghana, Senegal, Kenya, Burkina Faso, and Tanzania. And so the Hewlett staff really appreciated the local presence of the proposed Anansi team of different local evaluation firms to match where the work is taking place. And then second was the knowledge and experience. So building on that interest in finding local partners, our GEG team also appreciated a team who really understands the country context and the language to be able to build trust and develop a strong learning agenda. Being able to embrace the complex geographies, identities, lived experiences, and the different power dynamics of our grantees and the communities in which they work. And a big part of the work will involve developing country-specific indicators and narratives of change based on inputs from grantee partners. So that knowledge, skills, and experience in the countries is going to be really critical. And then third, an equitable team partnership. So in selecting to partner with the Anansi team, the GEG team really appreciated what they referred to as the leaderful team proposed by the Anansi partnership among each of the local evaluation partners. So equity really was playing a role in how the teams work together was structured, with each local evaluation partner coming into the partnership playing both a strong role and a leadership role for that particular element that they're going to be working on, with clear mutual respect for each other's ideas.
Amy, thanks a ton. Hippolyte, you're part of that Anansi team. I would love to hear from you. What made you feel welcome or invited to apply for this project? And Hippolyte, your audio is not coming through. Do you want to turn off your video and see if the audio comes through a little bit?
People, programs, and process. But let me focus on the process aspect. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's very good. Thank you.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you now. Thank you very much, Hippolyte.
Yes. So I was saying we were attracted by the 3 Ps: people, program, and process. But let me focus on the.
Your audio is gone again, Hippolyte. Give it a second to see if he can get his audio back on. Looks like we've lost Hippolyte for a moment. And let us get him right back in. I'm gonna have Hippolyte come back in once he's back on, and I'm gonna move. You with us, Hippolyte?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes,
go right
I am.
ahead.
So quickly process. First of all, we saw that there was no request for a full proposal from the start. Instead, they were requesting for a letter of interest, which basically meant that we didn't have to invest a lot of time and effort drafting a long proposal that we weren't sure would win. And as Julia mentioned, for small evaluation firms like us, that's very costly to invest that much time to develop proposals. So the letter of interest was really very handy in helping us to make our decisions. Second, it was inclusivity. We have been used to situations where cost for proposal will indicate that you have to have experience managing $5 million, $6 million, $10 million worth of evaluations before you can apply. This one didn't come with that conditionality, and so we felt that we were able to participate in this. The other part that attracted us was the level of transparency in the call for proposal. Transparency in the sense that the budget for the assignment was announced upfront, so we knew what we're going in for if we won, and so we didn't have to be second guessing what needed to be done. The recruitment process was also very clear, and the criteria were very clear in our mind. So we knew exactly what we needed to do, to get that. And then there was also the openness to working with a larger team, as Amy mentioned. The announcer team is made up of people from living in different continents. In Ghana, Tony is in Nigeria, Julius in Kenya. We have somebody in Melissa somewhere else. So we are spread out. That appreciation of the local presence and knowledge that they sought out in the proposal encouraged us to say, hey, wait, this is good for the announcer team to come in and take on. And then lastly, there was the commitment to participatory processes and participatory approaches. We saw in the proposal that the Hilliard Foundation was very much open to using participatory approaches to engaging their clients and also engaging the evaluation firms. And so that's why we said, well, this is kind of part of our style. It fits into what we do. And that's why we went in there straight for it. Caroline.
Thank you, Hippolyte. That was terrific. Tiffany, you recently had the experience of starting a project with the Sierra Health Foundation. And you probably also have some thoughts about how you were invited in that contracting process. We'd love to hear your reflections on how you felt invited as an independent local evaluator.
Yeah, so the first thing that I would lift up is that Sierra Health Foundation advertised intentionally. So they wanted a local evaluator presence, and they emailed local evaluators to notify us that the RFP was going to be released. So that gave me comfort that they were truly open to working with a small solo practitioner like myself. In that email, I was offered an opportunity to meet with Sierra Health Foundation staff in advance to the RFP being released, and I did. In that meeting, it gave me an opportunity to not only introduce myself, but to also talk about my orientation to evaluation and to hear what it was Sierra Health Foundation was looking for and their orientation to evaluation. And so I walked away from that meeting feeling like this was going to be a good fit. And again, not going to be using all this energy to put materials in and then get to the interview process and realize there's a mismatch. So it was nice that the process included that meeting up front. When I received the RFP, it had both a timeline and a budget, which was huge for me as a solo practitioner. One, with the timeline, it outlined when they were hoping to receive deliverables. So this allowed me to discern that this evaluation project would fit in with my other contractual obligations. And then the budget gave me a sense for the scope of the evaluation, again, being able to feel confident that I had the capacity to live up to the expectations of Sierra Health Foundation and what they were looking for from the evaluator. From the time that I received the RFP, Sierra Health Foundation asked that we notify them of our intent to apply within 3 weeks. So I was able to use that 3 weeks to reach out to the nonprofit organization that I wanted to partner with, for us to talk about what the approach to the evaluation would be, and also how we would delineate and divvy up the proposal tasks. So once I notified them that I did, Sierra Health Foundation, that I did want to apply, I had an additional 3 weeks to put the materials together. Now, again, this was really nice that in that 3 weeks, it really was spent just putting those materials together, because in that three previous weeks, I had the ability to talk with my partner about how we would do the evaluation and what the proposal would look like. So again, as a solo practitioner, this was really instrumental in that process, because I was able to fit the proposal writing in with the other work that I was doing in a way that didn't feel like I was jeopardizing the work for my other clients, or having to work these really long days. So from the time that I received the email that the RFP was going to be released, from the time that the materials were submitted, was 2 months. So it was a relatively spacious process in relationship to some other RFP processes that I've gone through. And the last 2 things that I'll lift up really briefly was about contracting. So Sierra Foundation has a portal that they ask consultants to upload their materials to. When I opened the portal, I saw that there was one requirement that didn't fit me as a solo practitioner. So I reached out to Sierra Foundation staff, and they immediately emailed a waiver. So it was really nice that Sierra Foundation had a process that accommodated firms, but also accommodated small local practitioners like myself. And we were able to get into the contract pretty quickly. And then when the contract was signed, 10% of the budget was paid upfront, year 1 budget upfront, which covered some of my time and my partner's time in order to get the project going.
Thank you, Tiffany. Maurice, that was really great feedback. I wonder if you could build on this and talk about it from the Sierra Health Foundation's perspective of what did you put in place so that folks like Tiffany could feel welcome to apply.
Well, thank you. So this has been a process that would have to say, helped build over my career, starting as a consultant first, or researcher, doing contractor work, then for my job, my previous employer, and to Sierra. And what I've tried to do is to really set a process that's been fair, equitable, transparent, particularly as Tiffany talked about. One of the things we strive to be as transparent, particularly around the information that we share. We do know across all firms that we invite small to large size firms, but we make also transparent who we're inviting, so then everyone can make a clear decision. In some cases, we do hope that facilitates other firms partnering together. In part, one thing that we would like to do, especially when you have smaller firms, we want to place them as much as a PI or co-PI in a project versus being a subcontractor, because often, as many things that you've cited in the paper around a subcontractor, having that expertise and local knowledge, we want them also to be able to help inform and shape the work. In addition, we've been intentional about getting time period, because we know for certain firms how they write proposals. So course, at larger firms, there may be, you might have a proposal team of 4, 5 people working on that, but we recognize with smaller firms, we want to be able to give that time. So we're intentional, typically depending on the scope of work, we say a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks of getting people introduced and giving them that time span to really just write the proposal. And as Tiffany pointed to, if they have to partner with somebody, how to figure out that work. And then finally, the contracting, this has been something that's evolving. I think as an institution, we can get better also. Particularly, we've adjusted, since I've been at Sierra, we've adjusted our insurance requirements, which we know, depending on the scope of work, that some requirements are not necessary. But then also the amount in terms of some firms may not have that amount or paying to that amount around for the insurance. So that's also been some of the internal workings that we've had going back and forth and working with our contract compliance as well as our legal to ensure that we're able to keep our firm and keep our processes open to smaller firms.
Maurice, thanks a ton for that. Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you with Hilton, and Toyin will be responding. Jeff, you all have similar processes in place. You've been working a little longer with a team, with a small local team. We'd love to hear from you kind of about the contract management and funding, and what makes it inviting for small local firms.
Yeah, thanks, Carla. Nice to be here with y'all today. I mean, I think it starts with some of the questions that have already been answered. Just it's a combination of, I think, the flexibility that's available within philanthropy, but also related to how we implement our strategies and the equity component that is integrated throughout all of our strategic initiatives. In this case, it's the Catholic Sisters Initiative. So, just to begin the process, we're starting to look for how do you get representation. There are various qualities that help sort of fill out what representation looks like for the context that we work in. But in this case, in addition to the evaluation expertise and the diversity that the team brings, the geographic representation was really key. And then so you then look to practically, how do we contract that? We are soliciting firms directly. So they're sort of a very allows for a lot more flexibility than previous organizations that I've worked in, where there's RFPs and things like that. But then I think the basic premise that this was a 5-year agreement, the sort of long-term planning that is allowed in that case with only yearly sort of payment tied deliverables is probably, I imagine from like a small firm, is hugely impactful in terms of flexibility. And although I don't think we're considered a trust-based philanthropy, we're a strategic philanthropy. The sort of the ability of staff to manage using sort of elements of a trust-based approach and how they engage with partners allows us that flexibility, I think, within the contract management space. And I think even though we are a strategic philanthropy, there has been attention to how do you right-size the amount of requirements and reporting that are done for all of our partners, not just evaluation partners. So I think that's been really key for us to build. The contracting mechanism has allowed for that flexibility to build a trusting relationship, adapt over time, and really get to know the team and sort of what their evaluation needs are. So I'll pause there, but over back to you.
Thanks, Jeff. So Toyin, you're part of that team. Talk to us about your experience with the contract management and funding.
Thank you very much, Caroline. I hope you can all hear me. And thanks, Jeff, for the introduction. We're very happy to have been in the testing models of Hilton Foundation, and many foundations have been in contracting for close to 2 decades. And I've experienced all kinds of strategies, some that have been mentioned today and some that haven't been mentioned, in hiring and managing contracts with small firms, which I represent, and especially in the South of the globe. I've had with my team, an incredible experience with the Hilton Foundation. We bidded for the contract, and we thought it was going to be like all the other contracts evaluation contracts that has been commissioned. And for 5 years, but we were surprised that we were given a grant rather than a contract, and the payment made on milestones, which we're all accustomed to. This made sure that we could plan and have control over our cash flow. Beyond that, it also placed the trust of delivering good quality services over to us. And so we believe that that gave us integrity and also gave us the confidence that we can venture into other fields that are demanding maybe more stringent rules about contracting. Knowing that Hilton Foundation has given us a head, they are most likely going to have a look at our proposal and provide us also with a space of maybe defense and on our contract. We received the grant from Hilton Foundation alongside with the initial annual payment of a 5-year plan. That was huge. Not only that, that also gave us some room to decide on what policy are we going to adopt. You know, we've always been used to, we pay each other on deliverable of our milestones, but now Hilton was teaching us another way of being equitable and making sure that we have control over the huge sum of money that is paid ahead of time before delivery, and make sure that every other small participating evaluation firm also has the same benefit to be able to grow. What has that done for us? That has given us room to be able to think of several other things beyond looking at cash flow, to looking at how do we deliver in most incredible way, innovative, creative, and still be able to keep our heads right on control over our finances. Another thing I found very worth working for is the openness. There's a continuous feedback, because someone will ask, if you've been paid ahead of time, why would you want to give the best? I think that the review process, the flexibility, the environment to work with the foundation is beyond what I have ever experienced. And my team also felt that they've gone beyond the call of duty. Then we've got to do best for them. And so that is inspiring us to even go beyond just the relationship of the job to other relationships. Like when we see mutual beneficial opportunities, we suggest, would you like to take these? Just like we've done joint presentations and at conferences, and we would like to do even more and do some publishing about what we found, and also talk about, you know, the best practices that we found working with the Hilton Foundation. The process of approval, like I said, follows the same rules that everybody who's spoken at this webinar has mentioned: transparency, clear communication. Of course, every contract will come with some introduction to those you're going to evaluate, the stakeholders within and outside. But Hilton Foundation not only provides the onboarding, they also go beyond that to make sure you're integrated in relationship with both the internal stakeholders as well as the external stakeholders. For me, that makes the job easy. So you don't have to think about how am I going to, you know, break the barriers of entry, how am I going to soft land within my work. That has already been provided. So annually, convenings, you find evaluators sitting alongside practicing participatory evaluation with those that we're evaluating. I want to mention also that from the time that the grant was announced to the time that the grant was signed, Hilton Foundation insisted that we shouldn't start any work, which meant that they weren't asking us to do more than within the time frame. So we were constrained to start work really after the evaluation contract has been signed and delivered and payments made. Unlike all of the experiences that I've had in almost 20 years, I think that has enabled me to feel that positive relationship goes beyond just creating the space, but also practicing one that recognizes that we may be small evaluators and evaluating firms, but we're just like any CSO or any grantee that foundations are investing in building their system, investing in making them bigger and stronger in the future. And we are very grateful for this.
Thank you, Ty. That was great. We have about 5 minutes for conversation among you. I don't know if any of you heard something from someone else where you'd like to make a comment, like to raise a question. And meanwhile, everyone else in the audience, please start putting questions into the chat. I see a few are already arriving. You also can raise your hands and we'll call on people to open up a discussion. So among you all who are here right now, would anyone like to add something or raise a question? And if not, Veronica, you have a question that you've put in the chat. And so I'm going to ask you to unmute and voice your question so that we can respond to it.
Am I unmuted? Have you
No.
given me power?
You have
Thank you for
power.
sharing your power with me. So my question, I'll just paraphrase what's in my very long comment. I'm very sorry that it's long. Is that I feel we're getting better, and because of CEI and many other organizations that have done a really good job of challenging philanthropy to like walk the talk around more localized, more contextual, smaller evaluation firms. And so I find that when I'm looking for a evaluation firm for not a project, which is closest that we can get to community, but for a program or a portfolio, which is typically an evaluation that will be presented to our board by the evaluation firm. I have found that that's been a little bit more challenging. And I work particularly in the indigenous-led areas. And I found it challenging from two fronts. The first is that most of the firms that responded to our RFP really didn't feel confident committing to a portfolio level analysis without actually speaking to community, which I completely understood, but we have project level evaluations of all of our projects that are indigenous led. And so at a portfolio level, you're kind of just looking at what they have found and doing a bunch of different types of assessments. And I was like, why don't they feel comfortable with that? And when we finally did land on a firm, indigenous-led, women-led firm, there were some gaps. Like they had never had that experience, and I thought, oh, we're doing really good with hiring project local evaluation firms, but we're not hiring them for these bigger ticket items. And if we're really looking, if I'm an evaluator and I'm looking to influence a philanthropy's choices, that's the way I think you can actually influence decision making, represent community in a different way. And so it's almost like we're losing out on that upstream type of influence and kind of focusing just on the project, which is fine, but seems like we're missing something. And so I was wondering if that was just my experience in my philanthropies practice or in the indigenous-led space, or if others have been having a different experience.
Thank you, Veronica. From my own knowledge, I know that Amy Toyin and Hippolyte can all answer this question. I don't know if others on the panel can as well. I wonder who wants to go first.
I can go.
Okay.
Yeah, so thanks very much for that question. I think the example that we have, the Anansi team had with the Hilton Foundation kind of answers the concern that you have. Because with the Hilton Foundation, we are looking at a portfolio strategy level evaluation where they have different partners all over the world doing different things. And then we are kind of helping them to kind of collate that learning at the portfolio level. The advantage that we have seen in this is that, as Tony mentioned, it's a 5-year assignment. So we have the time to be able to go through and work through with Hilton Foundation and the partners to be able to unearth those issues that are coming out from the project level, And secondly, we have a consortium, not one institute, but we have a consortium of people, different actors as evaluators in our team who come from different geographies and different thematic capacities. So being able to pull all that together allows us to bring that overview of things rather than hiring one single firm that will be charged with doing this. They will be hard pressed to do that if they don't have the local presence, local knowledge, and thematic diversity of expertise to be able to do that, and the time as well to be able to do that. Thank you.
Amy, Toyin, is there anything you'd like to add?
I will just add that I thought that was a good example, and that's how we have handled that on, that's our hope for how we'll handle it on the one that we have just contracted the Anansi team. And then on other evaluations where we've had that similar issue is sort of what does the team composition look like, and how can they bring different pieces of knowledge together. And just to acknowledge that I also experienced that doing portfolio level evaluation is challenging for many evaluators, regardless of whether they're small local evaluation firms or other types of evaluation firms.
Go ahead.
I can just add, Veronica, I mean, I think the board piece is still, I think that's sort of a challenge that remains because, and I think the Hilton Foundation, I've only been there for a few years, but there's a bit of a pendulum swing in terms of when evaluators show up and talk directly to the board, because I appreciate your example of like that's a key moment of influence. And right now we're sort of in the opposite pendulum swing where the evaluator Anansi is with the initiative and influencing that through the conversations that Toyin mentioned. But right now, our internal staff are the sort of board communicators at this point. So we don't have that opportunity for that direct influence of the board at this stage. But in the past, we have had evaluators in place that were talking directly to the board. At the time, I don't know that we had as much of a locally led development focus, but will be something to think about as the pendulum continues to swing back and forth. But I think it's an interesting challenge to navigate, particularly for portfolio level evaluation.
Thanks for that. And I know I'm speaking out of turn. There's a couple of chats there's a couple of points in the chat. I think I just think it's important to say that if those types of skills are a requirement for getting the job and they're not provided that opportunity, then it's almost hard. Then you almost end up with the larger firms. And so I'm glad to hear that we're all working on it, and that it is a gap, that while we're working at a local level, it's like, I think true agency, true influence happens when you're able to influence those larger decision makers. And so thanks for that. That's really helpful.
Thank you. I would like to invite Ellen in. Ellen, you responded to Veronica's comment, and would you like to voice that?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate this conversation. I am myself a solo evaluator, and still figuring out where are the places that being small and being independent really add value to clients, and where is it something I'm not quite ready for. But I think my point in the chat is that there's a real catch-22 with looking at past experience, particularly for small firms, is that, I may not have experience in that yet. That doesn't mean I can't do it. But if that means I'm not qualified to apply or take it on, then I will never get that experience. And so I think that's where I appreciate some of the intentionality in this conversation. And it sounds like there could be opportunities, maybe you have evaluators that are working at that project level. You've built a relationship, you really know what they're capable of. How can you help them step up to that next level through some capacity building, that then means they have, then they have that experience to continue doing for your foundation and perhaps for others. And so I think we have to be willing to invest a little bit, have that investment go both ways, and that can go a long way towards really opening the door for firms.
Thanks.
So I just want to add to this question too, because I think one of the things, in addition to as suggested with the capacity building, what I've done in the past for these portfolio level as well as at the programmatic level is really had success of getting, once we publish who we're inviting, firms have partnered together to also help be able to support that. So we've had, I've had like local evaluators. This is in my previous location. I was in Chicago, where a smaller local firm partnered with a much larger firm to help submit the proposal and was able to speak to that big, larger audience. But then they also brought that local expertise around Chicago of what we needed to support that work. And then similar here, we've seen similar. There may be like a slightly smaller and mid-sized firm. We've had that strategy for some of our youth development work that has also helped. That is also looking at like this larger portfolio level work, but then also relied on some of that, trying to really talk to like youth, be it youth programming, and really talk to bringing that community perspective. So we're kind of experimenting at Sierra at this right now, but so far the results have been on track and on par. And haven't gotten in front of the board though yet, so we'll see how that goes. I can update you later on that, Veronica.
Thank you, Maurice. Austin, you had a comment in the chat. Would you like to voice that?
I apologize. I'm in a loud public environment, and I'll be quick. It's kind of like we're all limited for time, and so where do we maximize that time, right, on both the funder side and the evaluator side, and to limit the burdens on one side of small and local solo firms, while also still attending to the relational aspects that have come up today and understanding where there's mutual alignment.
Thank you for that. That was super. And Michael Moses, you have something in the chat. Would you like to voice that?
Yeah, thanks, Carlisle. This is, I think, somewhat related to what we've been talking about, but I'd be really curious to hear from panelists about how you navigate the work of kind of thinking and working politically within your foundations and building momentum and support for the kinds of equity-based approaches that we've been discussing today with your colleagues, especially given that oftentimes, at least in my experience, there are many stakeholders within a foundation who are interested in an evaluation, even though that contract might be held with the evaluation office or the evaluation unit. I'd be curious as to what sorts of things you do to build support within your organizations for these kinds of approaches, and whether there are things that other folks on this call could do to help you build that kind of case more effectively, or if there are things that we could do collectively beyond having conversations like this and writing a lot of the articles that have, I think, begun to emerge over the past several years in particular. Just be curious for insights and thoughts on that.
Great. Any respondents?
I could go. Yeah, I think one way the announcer team has tried to deal with this issue is to advocate for the constitution of an evaluation advisory board made up of different kinds of stakeholders within the client organization that then we are able to bounce off ideas from them, right from the design phase through to the reporting and so forth, so that we are sure that different categories of people within the organization are able to input into that. But of course, we don't control very much who gets to be selected onto the evaluation advisory board, beyond advising that it should be as broad as possible to include people that have interest in the evaluations. So in the Hilton assignment, for instance, we have leadership of the Catholic Sisters organizations across the world, that we invited to be part of the advisory board. So it's not just the Hilton Foundation staff that are managing this process, but we are having input from the Catholic Sisters themselves, who are scattered around the world, and we regularly bounce off ideas from them, and that influences what we do. Of course, we go back to Hilton Foundation and check out what is being said and how practical it is, but there's that iterative process of making sure that everybody is inputting into the evaluation process. Thank you.
I'd just like to build on that for a little bit and ask Maurice and Jeff and Amy, or were you about to jump in, Jeff?
Yeah, I was just
Go
going to
ahead.
respond. I mean, Michael, just that point is probably the tension in which I spend the most time is trying to create with Ananse, like collaboratively finding that ideal space for the evaluation to go well. And I think Hippolyte sort of highlighted one approach that has been really useful in building and establishing that credibility to like ease the path for accepting and evaluative activities. Because I think there's, as most of us know, there's always a sort of inherent resistance to evaluation. And especially working with a faith-based organization, there are some other like very dynamic challenges that we have to work through. But I think just like having someone internal to help facilitate that and spend energy communicating and getting buy-in, I think is really critical on the inside, paired with what Hippolyte mentioned of engaging with stakeholders that also have credibility. In this case, like Catholic Sisters, it's really important to have that voice really clearly represented. So whoever the audience of focus is, making sure that there's sort of that multiple prongs to the strategy to help reduce those tensions that you pointed out.
Thank you, Jeff. Hallie, you made a comment related to Ellen's comment. Would you like to say any more about that?
I really not too much. Loved Maurice's, response about the work that's being done by Sierra Health to build capacity and to work alongside folks. But mostly we do a lot of re-granting, and it's not related to evaluation at my organization. So we do re-granting that does build the capacity of organizations in advocacy and education and outreach around health and different issues. Building capacity of smaller organizations and with those grants and with our partnership is part of our work, but I just don't see it as much in the space of evaluation where I had worked previously. So yeah, I'd be really interested in hearing about more opportunities for small evaluators. Sorry.
With any responses?
Well, we talked a little bit about the work with boards. One of at the Hewlett Foundation, we have a value of sharing our evaluations openly and publicly. So I also find that's an area where we have to think about that in terms of the budget. And what does it take, and what do teams need on staff, and what sort of additional support might they need or might not they need. But that's just another area where across all of our evaluations, we tend to be thinking about that topic and how to make sure that there is a report that's accessible, that's shared on our website.
Thank you, Amy. Stephanie, I see more than one. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and I would just add to that in saying that one other way that we think about this of trying to help in a way is to give feedback back to our people who we don't award proposals to. So, and it's not necessarily commenting on the proposal or itself, but more so from the idea of what the foundation, what our decision was based on, and things that we were looking for and considered. So I've also found that helpful as we re-invite firms to apply again for proposal.
Thank you, Maurice. Stephanie, I see you have more than one comment in the chat. Would you like to voice some of that?
I'm traveling at the moment and my connection is not very stable, so I'm just going to put things in the chat, but thank you for inviting me in.
Okay, cool. So watch Stephanie's comments in the chat, and Ian, wait, did I miss one? I had a nuts and bolts one here that I'm missing. Who said nuts and bolts?
Yeah, I did. This is Anupa from Mother Kabini Health Foundation, but I just wanted to know how folks got to know the local evaluation talent in their regions.
Who wants to take that one on?
I'll talk about my experience. I think you've also mentioned in the chat box the role of networking in the country on the local basis. Getting known in the areas where evaluators are based is, I think, the most important. And from that network, you make yourself available to be partners with others that are working at the local level so that your talent can be seen and recognized. And from there, the network can expand. Many people, especially in the global south, have not recognized why you must be part of the National Association of Evaluators. We must network. That is where it all starts, from the local setting to the national sub-regional setting. Then we get picked up and then we develop more skills. They will also practice some of our techniques and hone it until it becomes really refined, where I can work within the country and outside the country. And from there, I got introduced to several people who are on this call today. I met Kalai in 2009, and I met her physically. And I've worked with her from 2009 down to 2015 before I met her physically. And we've done incredible work across the globe. So I think that that is one way, you know, that is based on competence, that is based on expertise, that is also based on localization. You know your context, you're ready to represent your context, you're ready to play in that field. That's quite important. And then you build your knowledge of all the context, you want that locations, and be able to apply your skills across board. And so to answer your question, that is the way small firms can get known. If you're known in your base, someone will recommend you. And then you also have confidence to respond to call for proposals from bigger organizations beyond yourself. But definitely that is the best way to do it.
Tiffany, I'd love to pass that one on to you as well. Would you have anything to add to what Toyin has said?
I would just echo what Toyin has said. I think networking is really important. There's been times, within the AEA, there's a local evaluator topical interest group that's incredibly active. I've met a lot of folks in that space. I also, sometimes when I'll attend a webinar, someone will make a comment that really resonates me with regards to their approach to evaluation. So I might ask them, hey, do you want to connect, have a conversation, meet up, talk about what we're doing? So I think just actively networking and leveraging spaces that, you know, maybe into primary, like this webinar, you know, is to hear from other folks, you know, but are there folks that are in the chat that you feel like are making comments that really resonate with you? You know, maybe go to LinkedIn or use the chat space there to connect with them. So just always be thinking about, connecting with folks and that networking piece.
Ian Hopwood, you have asked about advice for VOPEs, and I think Toyin just gave you some advice for VOPEs, but I wonder if you'd like to voice your question, explain what a VOPE is for people who don't know what that is, and perhaps we build on that.
Well, thank you, Carlisle, for allowing me to speak. I have a cold, so if I'm croaking, I'm sorry. I'm speaking to you from Dakar. I've taken note of all you're saying, and the promotion of solo evaluated small companies is something which we're very motivated to do. The evaluation associations, the VOPE is the national association, as Toyin just mentioned, but the VOPEs are really very often very limited in their capacities. Most of them, you can look at the studies done by Matozzi for CLEAR and so on. Most of them don't have premises, don't have any form of full-time staff, have little money, therefore, for networking, get together, mentoring, and so on. Well-intentioned, but really often operating in very constrained circumstances. We've been fortunate in some ways because we have premises, the Standing Gall Evaluation Association, which the government have offered us. But that's wonderful. It's amazing to have a place where you can put documents, where you can have a small meeting, where you can do things, but very few are in that circumstance and so on. We're close to the university, so we can get a part-time assistant to do some of the follow-up and produce the monthly bulletin. But it really is a struggle, and we can only really rely on membership dues. So I think we need to look more clearly, more carefully. And of course, this is IOC and so on, and all these umbrella organizations of our partners and the regional networks, the RELAX and the AFREAs. But I think we have to continue to redouble these efforts and place more attention on the country level, because otherwise we stop at a level of sort of intercontinental or international interaction. And I manage to drag myself to AEA every year almost and so on. But these are individual initiatives. So we need to really have more of a strategy which really tries to look. Now, I think we have some opportunities now. USAID's localization, as it's being expressed in Senegal and led by Encompass with a project which is headed by Encompass with MSI, is doing a very interesting work of trying to get an inventory of who are these service providers, what are their problems, and so on. So at least now we have the potential of a 5-year program with this support to really invest. In fact, Tessie Katambas is visiting Senegal in about 10 days' time. We'll have a sort of a town hall meeting about evaluation capacity development. So I think things are changing, but we sometimes expect too much of the VOPE's national associations without being prepared to really give them a bit more attention, a bit more support. We've also managed to negotiate an agreement with the AEA, which now Julie Poncelet, who's the coordinator of the Youth Focus TIG, will visit Senegal in June. So we're really doing, but that's really a fortunate set of circumstances. We also have the CLEAR project based in Dakar. So there are a lot of things we need, but joining the dots and giving more targeted support, I think, to the VOPEs, untied support, minimal amount, but for rent costs, the VOPE can become visible and provide the sort of services we're talking about now to solo and individuals and young emerging evaluators and so on.
Thank you, Ian.
Sorry, it's long. I get carried away.
That's great. That's great. And Maurice, there's a question for you from Julia in the chat asking you to answer this question. So we're very lucky to have Maurice and Tiffany here, representing the US context. So Maurice, the question for you, could you answer this question about how you generated the group of local evaluators with whom you are working?
So there's a couple ways. So I will be honest, I'm new to the Sacramento area. Recently relocated here roughly 2 years ago. And so there were some intentional steps that I took to help connect with the local evaluators. So here we have a local AEA affiliate. So I spent time there getting to meet evaluators, attended some in-person events, did a few network events, and also was part of a couple panels. That was one. And I want to admit I have to get better at this because I'm always looking for ways to do this better. Two, Tiffany, in the sense that at Sierra Health, we've used local evaluators. Most of the foundation side of the work, or all the foundation side of the work, is place-based work. So here in Sacramento and parts of Northern California. So I also had access to some local evaluators who had done work here for us. But Tiffany also had a track record of also working in communities where we have also did funding and grant work prior. So we were also familiar with her work through the Building Healthy Community Initiative, which was also one of the sites that was here in Sacramento, was also part of a site that we funded for our BCLC project. And so we had some familiarity with Tiffany, her being in community, the partners that we work with are familiar. And then we've also had familiarity with her work product too, and how she operates as an evaluator. And then third, which also has helped, is because I'm new and building out of a team, I've also was intentional in hiring people from Sacramento who also knew sign of the evaluation landscape. So one of the new people that I've recently hired had a relationship with Tiffany from just working here as a nonprofit, but then also in their current role. Still, again, looking for more strategies of how I can incorporate. And that brought me to a question I do have, and if we have time for our panelists, just to figure out how are you advertising for local evaluators or recruiting them. I would just love to hear a little bit more about that. But yeah, so I would turn it back over.
Maurice, let's make, perhaps I see the chat is busy. Your question's a great question. Why don't I give that to Jeff and Amy? And then I also know Subarna's on the line and could provide a good response to that question. So let's go Jeff, Amy, and then Subarna to answer that question from Maurice. We'll see if we have any more time to ask any more questions, answer any more questions in the chat at that point.
Thanks, Carlisle, and thanks, Maurice. Good ideas that I think probably start thinking about more, just the especially with the place-based work. I think a couple of things that come to mind, and Ian, thank you for your points on like the national networks, because I think there's, from a funder side, to the extent possible, like investing in those networks is actually a really good way to help. And I think we've done that in a number of cases with AFRIA and ESSA Africa, which is focused on education and the pipeline of researchers there. Locally in LA, we've also funded, and it's through academic institutions, but their research agenda is an anti-racist research agenda, which is focused on trying to diversify the evaluation and research community in Los Angeles. So there are sort of these direct ways that funders, to the extent they have research and evaluation money, to really build that pipeline intentionally, I think is a key way to help directly get funds and come up with unique ways to get new evaluators in the space. And for the HPRI, which is the Homelessness Policy Research Institute, they are actually doing the RFPs to attract new and smaller firms. So it sort of almost adds a capacity for us. And then the last piece would be expanding the bench in the US, which is in connecting funders with smaller firms, which I think I've found to be useful. I think it's one of those longer term projects that the more that happens, I think the more likely you are to make a connection that actually really leads to a contract. So I would just make a plug for that domestically as well.
Thanks, Jeff. Amy, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I was going to mention the expanding the bench. We have used that in some of the coffee hours and coffee breaks, so that getting to know evaluators in advance, so that then when a certain project comes up, I don't do the commissioning, it's our program teams, but they would come to me for referrals, so I can refer them to those kinds of places. The thing I would say, so all those things, and then a lesson learned from us is that we kind of thought that by really broadening our letters, RFIs, if we just will put them on our website, that we would get more response. But of course, that wasn't enough. We really do have to have teams do the networking, really reach out, really ask, really make sure that the local evaluators do feel like, yes, people do want me to respond. They do want to hear with me. We really will be considered, so that we've had to make sure that we do that, those extra efforts as well.
Thank you, Amy. Subarna, I would love to hear your response to that. I thought your process with the Weaving Resilience Initiative was fantastic. And then I also saw Chavi in the comments making a similar input. So maybe Subarna and then Chavi, and then we will begin our wrap up.
Thanks for this, Carlisle and Hippolyte and everybody, Toyin. It's just nice to see many familiar faces and just to have this very grounded conversation. And I'm here with my colleagues, Bess and Kelsey as well. We're really interested in doing better on this. And so you'll see us trying with the smaller number of evaluations that we do, but we're hoping to across the chain, be more intentional and be more communicative, be more transparent about at all points on the chain, really wanting to do better and be less opaque as the funding community on all of this work. I mean, you all raised really, really good ideas that we've been thinking about, but just haven't had time to practice. And so it's energizing us to practice, such as the strengthening or building in additional and more flexible support to our partners to do not just the evaluation that we partner with them to do, but the other aspects that Veronica gets to your point about, a somewhat it makes me uncomfortable because we in philanthropy have set up these conditions and often have kept some of our evaluation partners away from boards, but then have high expectations when it comes to board, and then board too has very unrealistic expectations about what to expect. So, or what they see as good when it comes to evaluation. So anyway, just a lot coming up for, I know, all of us when it comes to how we do better, both in terms of the expectations that we set within philanthropy, but and how we work with our partners to address that. I actually wanted to come back to something that someone had mentioned in the chat, if it's okay, around how do you set budget, or how do you sort of work with partners on budget? And one of the things that we found where, I mean, full disclosure, we will have pragmatic and very real constraints on the budgeting side. There will be an envelope that we can't get past, and that's just a very real limitation. But what we have done is, like Amy, like others who've made their budget transparent in the RFP, LOI, RFP process, and in the process to get to know our potential partners, we've made clear that we want to hear about what is unrealistic, what is realistic within the constraints that we have. So if we've outlined for something aspirational in the RFP, these are the kinds of things we're looking for, the kinds of questions we're wanting to have answered, and here's the budget, do tell us what you, based on your experience, what you think is reasonable and what is not, and then hoping to be able to adjust what we expect to achieve or to have the evaluation cover on the basis of that conversation. So listening really hard and hopefully adapting to what is possible given the budget constraints that we have. So it might not be a ground up budgeting and development process, but it is hopefully us hearing and listening and then adapting the budget according to what are those expectations and real life experiences. I hope that's helpful.
Super helpful, Subarna. Thanks a ton. Chavi, do you want to make the last comment? I realize we're about over time. I hope everyone has just maybe 5 minutes extra. Chavi, are you there to voice you have some inputs in the chat?
Yeah, thank you, Carlisle. I appreciate this conversation. I think Subarna spoke a little bit to this, but essentially we are kind of grappling with how to, right size the budget, right size the scope. Even we do want kind of input we want to work with evaluators during even the design stage of the evaluation. And often, like when the RFP comes out, like there's very little room to kind of like we anchor ourselves in the RFP a little bit, and there is not real too much room to kind of like shift from that. So we're thinking about perhaps adding an inception phase, separately budgeted, but like to just like even design that process. But of course, that adds additional time and resources. I mean, both are kind of obviously not always available. So I was just wondering whether others have ideas around this, have done something similar. Yeah, that was essentially my question.
It's a great question. I think we're going to sit with that question because we are out of time and we want to honor everyone's time. Hippolyte, I'm going to turn it over to you to do a brief next steps and then to Julia to do a closing.
So first of all, I'd like to thank everyone for coming in and participating very actively. We've had a very lively discussion. A lot of questions have been raised. Some have been answered, some have not been answered. We will try to go through and find ways to answer those questions that have not yet been answered. But as we said at the beginning, this is the beginning. This is the first of a series of webinars. So we might be taking up some of those questions in subsequent webinars, and we invite you to keep in touch and be part of it. We encourage you also to read the open letter that we shared earlier. You might find some of the answers in those reports, and if you don't, it will prepare you to engage further. And if you want to stay engaged with us, we have a form that we will make available that you can fill out and keep in touch with us so that moving forward, we can work together to keep this discussion going and jointly find ways to make it work for evaluators, commissioners of evaluators, and those who fund evaluations. Thank you very much, and I'll turn over to Julia.
Well, I just want to close this out by number one, saying thank you so much first to Carlisle and Hippolyte for raising this. It clearly resonates with many, many people. And so thank you for putting your time and your thought leadership into lifting this up for the larger field. And thank you to all of the speakers. This was incredibly practical, grounded conversation, which we all want more of in our lives. So thank you so much for taking the time to share your experiences, and to everybody who participated as well. And just a +1, there's more coming on this topic. So please stay engaged, and thank you so much for your time.
Everybody. We'll look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you.
Huge thanks to our panelists who did a beautiful job.
Amazing.
Yes.
Amazing. Okay. So Carlisle, you'll do
a moment.